영어 동화 세상 리틀팍스.
The Enchanted Castle. Chapter 1. The Children Get Lost. There were 3 children, Gerald, Jimmy, and Kathleen. And they were at school in a little town in England. The boys were at one school, of course, and their sister was at another. They used to see each other only on weekends, so they looked forward to going home for summer vacation. But one year, they couldn't go home because someone in the family had the measles. That disease was easy to catch. After many letters back and forth, their parents agreed to let them stay at Kathleen's school. All the girls had gone home. All the teachers had left except the French teacher. Now the boys had arrived and they were drinking tea with Kathleen.
We need a summer project,
She said.
Let's write a book.
Too much work.
Said Gerald, who was the oldest.
We'll do something outdoors. A cave would be good. We could eat our meals there.
There aren't any caves,
Said Jimmy, who liked to say no.
and I doubt Mademoiselle will let us go out by ourselves.
Well, I'm going to talk to her.
Said Gerald. He washed his hands and combed his hair before he knocked on Mademoiselle's door. She was reading.
Excuse me, mademoiselle.
Said Gerald politely.
I thought I'd say hello because you're in charge of us.
Mademoiselle was charmed by the young man's manners. Can I do anything for you?
No, thank you. We don't want to be any trouble. In fact, we would cause less trouble tomorrow if we spent all day outside.
Mademoiselle smiled.
I know what you really want. You want to be left alone.
Gerald laughed, and Mademoiselle did too.
Go ahead,
She said.
I won't stand in your way.
The next morning, the children went off on their adventure. It was a beautiful day,
We're sure to find something.
said Gerald.
A boy at school said that there was a cave near here, but he said there's an enchanted castle too, so none of that may be true.
The children walked along the road, which was very hot. They decided to share a drink from their lunch. Soon they came to a fork in the road. They went right and came to another fork, and then another,
We're completely lost.
said Kathleen.
What fun!
Now the trees arched overhead, and bushes lined the banks along the road,
Let's have some lunch.
said Jimmy. As they sat down, Gerald leaned against some bushes.
Oh my!
He cried. The bushes gave way, and he almost fell backward. The other two pulled back the bushes. There was a large hole in the bank,
It's a cave!
said Gerald.
I'm going in.
Oh, don't!
Said Kathleen.
There might be snakes.
But Gerald was already crawling through the hole.
It is a cave! Come look!
Kathleen and Jimmy followed him down the hole. They walked a short distance and came out into the sunshine,
How wonderful!
said Kathleen. Ahead of them was a tall arch framed with ferns and grasses,
It looks like a train tunnel.
said Jimmy,
It's the entrance to the Enchanted Castle.
said Kathleen.
Oh, don't be silly.
Gerald led the way to the arch,
There's a set of steps.
said Jimmy. They followed Gerald down the steps, walking slowly through the darkness. Up ahead was a patch of daylight. The children passed under another arch and out onto a terrace. Below them was a lake with an island. Beyond that, marble statues gleamed among the trees. White towers stood out against the sky.
It's the Enchanted Castle!
Cried Kathleen. The Enchanted Castle, Chapter 2, A Sleeping Princess. Gerald and Kathleen were certain that the White Towers belonged to an enchanted castle. Jimmy was not so sure. They walked through a beautiful garden until they came to a maze. They tried to find the center of the maze, but it was impossible.
What's that?
Gerald picked up a red thread on the ground. One end was tied to a thimble, but the other end...
There is no other end.
Gerald realized.
Maybe it leads to something.
I think the gardener put it there,
Said Jimmy.
Look at the crown on that thimble!
Said Kathleen.
Do you think a gardener would have a princess's silver thimble?
Let's follow the thread.
Gerald walked forward, winding the thread around his fingers as he went. The thread led them into the middle of the maze. There they found a circle of green lawn with a sundial in the center. All around the edge of the circle was a marble seat. The thread ran across the lawn. It ended in the hand of someone sleeping on the seat.
It's an enchanted princess,
Said Gerald.
Her clothes are so old-fashioned.
Said Kathleen.
She must have fallen asleep 100 years ago.
She isn't really a princess.
Said Jimmy. Gerald and Kathleen laughed. They didn't care what Jimmy said. Every part of the adventure, the cave, the maze, the thread, felt magical to them.
Lift up the veil, Gerald.
Whispered Kathleen.
If she's beautiful, we'll know she's a princess.
Lift it yourself,
He said. Kathleen gently lifted the veil.
Isn't she lovely?
Not too bad.
Gerald muttered.
Now, Gerald, you must wake the princess.
Said Kathleen.
She's not a princess.
Insisted Jimmy.
She's only a little girl dressed up like a princess. Look at how long her dress is. She won't be any taller than Gerald when she stands up.
Kathleen ignored him.
Gerald, you're the oldest. You have to kiss her awake.
Not me.
Cried Gerald.
She'll slap me the minute she wakes up.
Then I'll do it.
Said Kathleen.
But I don't think it'll do any good.
And it didn't.
I don't mind kissing her.
Said Jimmy.
I'm not afraid like some people.
With that, Jimmy planted a loud kiss on the princess's cheek. The three children stood waiting to see what would happen next. The princess opened her large dark eyes. She stretched her arms and yawned. Then she said,
So, the 100 years are over? Which one of you is my hero? I am,
said Jimmy.
my prince.
The princess held out her hand, and Jimmy shook it hard.
But you aren't really a princess, are you?
He asked.
Of course I am. Look at my crown.
She pulled aside her veil to reveal a crown of diamonds.
How did you ever get past the dragons?
Gerald ignored her question.
Then this really is an enchanted castle?
Of course it is. Don't be stupid.
The princess stood up and her dress fell in waves around her feet.
I told you her dress would be too long,
said Jimmy.
It must have grown over the years,
said the princess.
Let's go back to the castle, and I'll show you all my lovely jewels. Would you like that?
Yes,
said Gerald.
but
But what?
The princess sounded impatient.
we're awfully hungry. We never got to eat our lunch.
The princess looked at the sundial. It was 3 o'clock.
You've had nothing to eat for hours, but think of me. I've had nothing to eat for 100 years.
The Enchanted Castle, Chapter 3, Inside the Treasure Room. The children walked in a slow parade toward the castle. They were sure that they had stepped into a fairy tale. At last they arrived in a large hall filled with wooden benches and tables. Suits of armor and old flags stood against the walls.
Wait here,
Said the princess.
and don't talk while I'm gone. This castle is full of magic. I don't know what will happen if you talk.
Jimmy wanted to say that he didn't think anything would happen, but he didn't. The princess returned carrying a tray.
I could only find bread and cheese and water, but it doesn't matter. They'll turn into anything you like, unless you have some dreadful secret fault. What would you like to eat? Roast chicken,
Said Kathleen. She watched as the princess cut some bread and laid it on a plate.
green peas,
The princess cut a piece of cheese and laid it beside the bread. Then she handed the plate to Kathleen. The boys asked for roast beef and cabbage. Kathleen cut the bread as if she was eating roast chicken, but it still looked and tasted like bread. She wondered what her secret fault was as she watched the boys eat their food.
This is a game, isn't it?
Said Jimmy.
Pretending we're eating roast beef? But it is beef. Look at it.
The princess opened her eyes very wide.
Of course.
Said Jimmy weakly.
I was just joking.
Everyone was very hungry. They ate and drank and felt much better.
Now, if you're finished,
Said the princess.
I'll show you my treasures.
They followed her down a long hall to some steps. Underneath the steps was a door hidden by a tapestry.
This door leads to my private apartments.
Said the princess. She guided them through a dark corridor until they came to a room. The princess went in first and threw open the shutters. The small domed room was filled with light. Its blue ceiling was painted with gold stars, but the room was empty.
Where are the treasures?
Kathleen asked politely.
Don't you see them?
Said the princess.
No!
Said Jimmy.
And don't try fooling us again. There's nothing here. Then I guess I'll have to say the charm,
Said the princess.
Close your eyes, please.
The princess chanted some nonsense words. There was a creaking, rustling sound.
Open your eyes now.
The children could not believe their eyes. Silver dishes, gold cups, and diamond crowns lined shelves around the room. All around were piles of necklaces, rings, and bracelets.
Oh my.
Gerald whispered.
Now, do you believe I can do magic?
Asked the princess.
Yes.
Said Kathleen.
May we touch? Go ahead.
The children had great fun playing with the treasures. Suddenly, Kathleen had a thought.
Do your parents know you're awake? Oh, yes,
Said the princess.
I told them when I got the bread and cheese. They're busy right now. Here, try this bracelet. What's this old stuff over here?
Asked Jimmy.
Those are all magic things.
Said the princess.
What does this ring do?
Asked Gerald.
It makes you invisible. I'd like to try that.
said Jimmy.
No! I'm the only one who can touch these things. If anyone else tries, they'll lose their magic. Close your eyes and I'll demonstrate the ring.
The children closed their eyes.
Now, count to 50.
Gerald counted aloud. Everyone could hear a creaking, rustling sound.
49, 50.
The children opened their eyes. The jewels had vanished, and so had the princess.